Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast, formerly known as Living with Your Child's Addiction. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. And today we have a guest. Dominique is the founder and host of the podcast For Love of Recovery, which helps people navigate their sibling substance use. I saw For Love of Recovery on Instagram and I got really excited because there's not enough helpful support for any family members. But I think that siblings are even more left out than parents or spouses. And they have their own unique experience that everybody doesn't really understand. And I've only come to understand that better just through having parents describe to me what their kids share with them about their experience. So I was really excited to have you on the podcast today to talk about this. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with you just sharing a little bit of your background and what led you to starting the podcast.
Sure. My name is Dominique, and I have a younger brother who is currently 20 years old, and he's been struggling with substance use disorder since he was in his early teens. Started off with marijuana, eventually led to opioids, and it's been an ongoing battle for our family. And during that process, I've been going to Naranon meetings and have found that to be super helpful. But there was also this passion that I had to create some kind of change. I felt that I couldn't do that directly with my brother, but I wanted to make some kind of impact. And during this experience of going to Naranon, I really learned that there weren't a lot of platforms and resources for siblings specifically. And I realized that was an area where we have so many untold stories, and I wanted to help tell them.
Yeah. And I think that it really does help to it helps to hear from anybody who's experiencing this, but when you can be with in a room with another sibling or another parent or a spouse, it really does make a difference because while all of our experiences are similar, each one has its own unique challenges, I guess I'd say. So it really does help to have that connection with other people who understand what you're going through. One of the things that I've noticed is that I think the sibling experience can be really misunderstood. And so I'm wondering if you can share some of the things ways you felt you were misunderstood or ways you've heard other people share with you that their experiences felt misunderstood.
Absolutely. It's definitely a loaded question. I think if I'm looking at my personal experience, I think one of the ways that I felt understood is that I've kind of been given this perspective that I'm just his sister, and I don't want to say, quote, why do you care so much? But that's kind of like the feeling that I got from a lot of people is, why do you care so much? It's not affecting your life, or it's your parents, responsibility to pick up the slack and help your brother and do X, Y, and Z. Whereas I felt deeply impacted by my brother's substance use, especially because we're 10 years apart. And I've always felt that I resonated more with this mother role or caretaker role because I've always, been there to help him and do things. So while I'm not a mom and I'm not his mom, I really felt connected to this role of being his caretaker or part of like this role of being the older sister. And I felt inclined that there was something I needed to do. And I think that was really misunderstood by a lot of people as maybe a sister who is over involved or over invested in her brother.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of those words hurt. Justice sister, why do you care so much? I think it's always surprising to me how callous people can be in these situations without realizing it. Sometimes I look back on things I've said to people in the past too, and I've learned so much now that I am better. I certainly wouldn't say I know all the right things to say, but Some of these things are really helpful. And I agree with you that I like that you referred to yourself as a caretaker. And I have had actually siblings in my mom's coaching group because their role was so similar to a mom. And I can see how, for different reasons, why when you really love somebody, you might fall into that role. And even we're not dealing with addiction in my family, and my oldest sister is very motherly to me. There's a 10-year difference between us, too. And so I can see how you feel that way. And I'm wondering what would have been more helpful for you, like ways that people could have supported you that would have felt better than hearing those things.
Yeah. Um, I think my mom has played a huge role in how I show up as a caretaker. She is, that is running through her DNA. My mom is the eldest of five kids, or the second eldest of five kids, the eldest of girls. And she's always been the caretaker for her parents and, naturally for my brother and I, and, helping my father with a lot of things. And I think I kind of watched that and looked at that as the role to, as like this is what a good mom or a good woman or a good parent does is they endlessly look after the people they care for. And I think I kind of internalized that. And I thought that me being a good sister or a good daughter or good whichever role meant doing the same thing. And my mom and I have talked about this, and it's nothing like too surprising, is I wish that I would have seen her take care more of herself and prioritize her own well-being. And I think that would have been more of a way to model the behavior that I wish I was exposed to more.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think, like, so any mom who's listening, here's your permission to take better care of yourself. I heard a quote once, and I don't remember the exact words, but it was just that, like, taking care of us is taking care of our kids, that it's not selfish to take care of ourselves. Like you mentioned, it sets a great example. And I don't know where, I guess it's all through society, that messaging that mothers have to sacrifice themselves to be a good mom, when really that's not the case at all. That I know with my daughter, it really helped her to see me happy and thriving and not have she was already struggling with her own substance use, with her own emotions. She didn't need the weight and responsibility of my life and my emotions, right? Like me taking responsibility for that was really helpful to her. So those are great points. Um, I'm curious, do you feel like you were ever treated differently because of your sibling, because of your brother's struggle with substance use? Like, do you think that it maybe took your mom's, some of her capacity away or anything like that?
Yeah, I think again, because of this 10-year age difference, I was kind of looked to as a support system for my mom. Going back to when I was a teenager, I would help her with like the little mundane things that might not seem like a big deal, but over time kind of stack up. I think those little things start with like, picking my brother up from school, helping him with homework. And I think those things made me the support system that I've been. And I think because I was able to handle all of those things really well and juggle, school, work, my personal life, my social life without much of an issue, it became more challenging. And the expectation became that I would continue to be able to do those things. And as I got older and started to prioritize my own well being, that became even more difficult for me. So, this idea of like me now trying to step out of this caretaker role um, became even more challenging. And there was this expectation that, I'm still kind of in that role where I'm being leaned on as a support system. And I think that's what makes it really challenging is learning how to step back. And again, going back to like being misunderstood, it's like it's not my intention to, hurt anyone. But at the end of the day, like I have to start prioritizing myself and what I want for my future that's not in the context of my parents or my brother.
Yeah, and that's a really hard place to be in as, a grown woman, let alone somebody young starting out their life, just trying to focus on building your own future. And, when you said I was looked at as a support system for my mom, I had kind of this flash of different clients who have signed up to work with me saying that generally it's their daughters have said to them, like, I can't be your only support system. I can't be the only person that listens to everything that you're going through. You have to go find somebody else to support you. And that's when they go and they reach out to find more of an expanded support system. So I think that's a really important point to make, how, like, it is important for us to work together as a family, and that's so helpful. But individually, we all need our own support system as well, because this is so hard. We're all just trying to find our way in life. And it is really easy to lean on somebody like a daughter that you're close to. But it's also important to remember that when we do that, it can be really hard. I can imagine those kids that said that to their moms, that they needed to go find other support systems, that it was really hard for them to have to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it was really hard for me, and it's something that I still struggle with is, like you said, I am really close with my mom, but being really close doesn't mean that you have to wear the burden of whatever their experiences are. And that's why now a lot of what I do is try to encourage my mom to get help, or, whether it's calling her own support system, whether it's friends, other family members, seeking out counseling. It doesn't always come in the form of therapy, but like whatever your support system might look like. I think it's important to have that circle that you can lean on that's not necessarily your kids all the time. Um, One more thing is that it is really hard, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's an important part of prioritizing you and your family, because it might seem like a selfish act, as especially if you're struggling with substance use in your family. I might not have time to go talk about my problems with someone new, but I think reframing that thought as I need to get help so I can have a clearer perspective, so I can better show up for my family or my child, whoever it is that's struggling with substance use.
Yeah. I've been listening. Well, I just finished listening to this really good book called Who Not How. And it was about when you need help with something, instead of thinking, how can I do this? If it's a challenge that's above what instead of thinking, how can I do this? It's who can help me do this and who can help me do that, do it the fastest. And one of the things, like when I first learned about craft, and I found the book Beyond Addiction: How Science and Kindness Help People Change. I don't think there were any coaches like me around at that time. If there was, I couldn't find them. And so it took me so much longer to do it by myself and to learn the skills that I needed. So that's another important reason to get some kind of skilled support, is because we can learn more and make changes faster, which is better for everybody. And this might not have applied to you since you're 10 years older, but did you ever feel pressure to be like the perfect child, or not to put extra stress on your mom because she was already under so much stress because of what your brother was going through?
Absolutely. It's something that I talk about with my parents pretty openly, is that sometimes I feel that I can't come to them with what's really happening in my life because I don't want to add to that pressure of what they're already dealing with. And even if it's really small things that might be going on, I know that they already have a lot on their plate with my brother. Um, but at the end of the day, it is really up to them to like make space and manage some of that. So I am working on, if they're asking me how I'm doing, I'm going to tell you how I'm doing if you're asking. But also, if you're going to ask your kid or whoever it might be how they're doing, like be ready to show up with curiosity and like listen and ask questions, rather than just hugging them to death and just, moving on to the next topic. Because if they're already carrying a burden of not wanting to, splash their experiences onto you, you really want to create a safe space for them to be able to do that.
Yeah. I think one, that it's great that you are honest, that you're able to be honest, that you had that kind of relationship with your mom, that you can say what you need. I know that takes a lot of courage. And it is a really important point that when just to really be open to the idea that while this feels like it's all about us as parents, it's really not. It affects the whole family. And a lot of times, what I'll hear is that the parent will spend a lot of time trying to maybe if the other sibling's having a hard time and they're not feeling necessarily as compassionate or sympathetic for various reasons, that the parent will spend a lot of time trying to convince them that they need to forgive them and get over it. And I can only imagine that that's got to be a lot harder too, that then it's just another instance of not feeling heard or feeling maybe left out.
Yeah, that absolutely sounds right. I think there's a little bit of like invalidation that goes on sometimes when a parent or whoever doesn't fully understand that child or sibling's experience. That's why I think it's like really important to get to know like what their experience is and asking them those questions, or kind of reading the room on, if your child is acting in an atypical way than what they normally do, is picking up some of those signs where they might be struggling. This will also vary, I think, depending on where that child is in their adulthood or in their adolescence. Um, but I think, especially when they're younger, they might not be inclined to just come out and share with you how they're feeling, and they might not actually know how they're feeling. I think it's not until, we're a little bit older that we get some of that emotional awareness to actually share what's occurring for us. So I think, like I said, genuinely approaching the conversation with a little bit of curiosity and wanting to know how your kid or whoever is doing.
Yeah, yeah, those are great points. That curiosity is really important. It's so easy to get in that convincing role of like wanting to convince them of the way you see things because it seems like maybe that would be easier. And but that just creates resistance of instead if you're just really curious and open to each person's experience can be completely different and still valid and real because
Absolutely.
it's all happening through our own perception.
Absolutely. I think both things can coexist at the same time, whether it's you as a parent, like your experience is going to be different because you are a parent. Whereas a sibling, your experience is going to be different because you're not that person's parent, but you are still going to communicate, respond, and behave in different ways. And it doesn't make that any less true for that person. I think in the context of siblings, it can be really hard because, especially if you come from the same parents or you live in the same household, exposed to the same kind of triggers, you might be expecting both of those siblings to respond in a very similar way. And I think that was some of the pressure with my brother, where, we grew up in the same household, we had the same biological parents, we lived in the same neighborhood, we're more or less afforded the same opportunities, yet we've responded to our environmental triggers in completely different ways. And I think my brother was, quote, dubbed the trouble kid or the bad kid because he didn't actually know how to respond in it and just manage his emotions in a healthier way. And I think those are sometimes ways that siblings can be pinned against each other, um, unintentionally. I think holding them to the same standard of how they're going to show up in the world or expecting less of them because another child showed up in a different way.
Yeah, that is such a good point that how like they're just expecting them to be the same because they're siblings, but really we've just got two humans here who are completely different. They have a different brain. Their brain processes things differently. And I think a lot of times, even parents will think like, my husband and I are both really successful, highly, motivated people, but how did we have this kid who isn't successful or is really struggling? And, so they can apply that same logic there. And all it really does is just cause everybody more pain. And so, like you pointed out, if we just see each other individually and only measure against ourselves or not compare, then it creates that curiosity, right? Like instead of when we're comparing, we're just saying you should be this way. But when we approach it with curiosity, it opens up the opportunity to see how we could help or work with each person individually based on their needs.
Absolutely. And like adding on to that point is if someone is, quote, not meeting your expectation or not reaching the same goal as someone else, whether it's because of their addiction or because of some other life event, I believe no one is really going to show up in their world doing their worst or being at the lowest point of their lives intentionally, right? I think everyone shows up for the most part doing the best they can with what resources they have, with what experiences they have, what connections they have. So I think again asking those questions around what is it that so and so is not being afforded? What don't they have access to? What might be encouraging them or, influencing how they respond? I think that can help shift the mentality from this is what so and so should be doing versus this is what they're capable of doing. And I think that's how you can also approach the situation or the relationship with a little bit more compassion.
So you are very self-aware. Like it sounds like you've probably, I don't know if you've done a lot of research. That's really my question is, how did you come to these conclusions in such a place of acceptance? And, what has helped you with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I kind of get the reaction, and I'm like, I didn't even realize that I was that self-aware to a degree until people started pointing it out. But honestly, I think really exposing myself to a lot of different resources and different ideologies around addiction. When I first started going to Naranon, as many people might be familiar with, they really approach, things with the tough love perspective. And some people, come from a place of more harm reduction, or, if you're reading beyond addiction, or if you're introduced to the invitation to change approach and craft, those really teach very different, all of those experiences teach very different ideologies. And I don't think it's necessarily about sticking to one program or the other, but I think it's really thinking about like the blend of ideologies that work best for you and understanding addiction through like multiple lenses. I think it's important to understand it through the scientific lens and understanding why addiction is categorized as part of substance use disorder. I think also understanding the emotional factors and the environmental factors are really important because it's not necessarily like a 1 plus 1 is 2 approach. There are a lot of outside influences. And for me, I think where I've got what led up to this point is seeing the trials and errors in our personal life when it comes to my brother and his addiction. Quote, we've tried like the tough love approach where we've tried like distancing him as much as possible and cutting things off. That didn't necessarily work. We've tried like the compassionate and, being connected. And some people might interpret that as enabling, right? And that sometimes worked, sometimes it didn't. And I think at the end of the day, it's like doing what you can live with and understanding that there isn't going to be a one size fits all approach and just really exposing yourself to as many resources and perspectives as possible, I think is really going to help people navigate the experience a little bit more confidently.
Yeah, I really like that. Doing what you can live with. It is so important because nobody else has to live with the consequences of the advice that they give you. And it's so easy for people to give that tough love advice, but they don't have to live with the consequences of if they cut their kid out of their life and maybe they never see them again. Right. So it is really important for us to remember that nobody else has to live with those consequences. We're the only ones. We have to do what fits in with our values. And that was what really helped me too. I started expanding what I was looking for as far as I had tried tough love. It wasn't working for me and it was only making things worse. And so I just started trying to find anything I could that was different. And it was just, putting all these little pieces together of maybe a YouTube video like Johan Hari's TED Talk about the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection, or learning how some other countries were approaching supporting people struggling with substance use. So it does make a difference to have a really wide view of things. And I'm still learning new things and still trying to be open minded when I hear something and it makes me think, like, oh, that's not right. I'm still trying to be curious about these things that still could be even stigmas that don't have science to back them up. It takes a lot of work to get over, when society's full of stigma about something. And families have to face a lot of that, of getting pathologized, being called enablers or codependent or other things. And I'm wondering if you've experienced anything like that.
Definitely. Like I mentioned, going to Naranon, we use the term enabling codependent a lot in conversation, not necessarily pinpointing it to anybody, but that's part of the dialogue and the vocabulary that we use. And I've been pinned, whether, intentionally, directly or indirectly, as an enabler because I'm supporting my brother. I do use the term enabling, but I think the way I use it is very different from how a lot of people use it. I think a lot of people who do use the word enabling use it as doing anything that is conducive to someone's either positive or negative behavior. I think, giving them a place to live is, a lot of times people consider that enabling. I consider enabling anything that is directly contributing to someone's substance use. So providing housing, I don't consider that enabling, but I consider that a form of support. When my brother is either sober or he is showing efforts to work on his recovery, I lean in and support him in that sense. Some people might consider that enabling because I'm providing a relationship. I don't believe that. I think it's an important distinction between providing someone with either the substance or providing someone with money to get their substance, et cetera, versus how can I show up with compassion and connection and just listen to them. So I think those definitions are going to vary from person to person or from ideology to ideology, but I think it's important to have your own understanding of what that means for you too.
Yeah. Yeah, we can enable health and wellness. And so I try to use the word in that context to help people see it a little bit differently and talk about how it's not black and white and it can change even from day to day in a relationship. Because there were times where I wouldn't give my daughter cash, but when she was in recovery and not able to find a job yet, I was giving her cash, and it was really hard for my brain to make that transition. But having even some framework to help you work through those decisions of what is really helpful, what is a helpful way to support somebody versus a way that might be holding them back. Uh,
Absolutely. I think something that I've heard that is really important in, I think, making that distinction between helping versus quote enabling is understanding it's whatever solution you're providing this person, something that they cannot do for themselves. So, for example, if this person is caught up because they don't have a job right now and maybe they just got laid off and need a short term solution to find some extra income and you're letting them borrow some money, I think that's helping. Versus if this person is sitting on themselves all day, doesn't apply for a job, that has no interest in applying for a job, and now you're giving them money with the likelihood that they're not going to repay you, I might consider that enabling a situation.
mhm.
So I think understanding that distinction between where that person's in their life, what the situation is, and what is the realistic expectation in this helping versus is there a false expectation that they're gonna respond to that in a different way?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the looking at what's a realistic expectation. That's really important. And then I think instead of calling somebody an enabler, it would be because a lot of times that's what you get, like, don't enable. And then that's the end of the sentence. Like, okay, well, what do I do? And I think, just instead of saying something like that, it's so much more helpful to say, well, explore how that person could set a boundary. What's like a baby step into that area, so that they can start building the muscles that they need, the parent or whoever it is, to make the changes that they know would be healthier. We just need so much more compassion for
I agree.
everybody in this space.
Absolutely.
So, is there any kind of support that your family, or maybe something you've heard other siblings have received? Like, what do you think would have been most supportive for you in the earlier stages before you became so educated yourself about this?
Yeah, I think some kind of support that I would have liked to receive for our family was I think more individual and group counseling, so like family therapy. I think getting that started earlier on and having realistic expectations of what that would look like. I remember the first time my brother and my family and I went to family therapy. I think he might have been about 13 or 14. And we walked in, we kind of thought like we would all share our story, against my brother when things just started to really escalate with his substance use. And it was everybody pointing the finger at everybody. Everybody became the scapegoat. Everybody became the victim at the same time. And I think we were all just so hurt by it that we just never went back.
Hmm.
And I think, now that I'm in therapy and I've spoken to other people about that experience, it's like that's completely normal. Your first few sessions are people pointing the finger because everyone is trying to get their story across. And it's really the job of the counselor to really understand what those roles are and understand everybody's experiences before you're really getting into the work. And if I knew then what I know now, I would have really advocated for my family to go back to therapy and continue pushing that. And maybe things would be very different. Maybe they wouldn't. But I think that's one resource I would have liked to explore. And then I also I wish my parents really had the support to work on things together. Whereas instead of approaching a situation or my brother's substance use or whatever issues from two totally different perspectives and never getting on the same page, I wish they had the resources to come, whether or not they disagreed, but come to a situation, come to my brother or I as a united front. And I think that's something that a lot of parents struggle to do when there is substance use or any kind of other um, big life change is working together to show up as a united front before addressing a situation. I think, especially when kids see their parents pinned against each other, they actually use that towards their advantage. So, that's why a lot of the times there's a parent that's good cop or bad cop. So I think showing up as much of a united team as you can, I think will definitely help, I think, a relationship, but also the entire family.
Yeah. Yeah, when you first told that story, I kind of smiled because I thought of, like, I was just such a tattletale. Like, that's how what I felt like when Helena first, my daughter, started struggling with substance use. Like, I was just tattletaling on her to anybody who would listen because I was so desperate for somebody to help me. So everywhere we went, I'm just telling this horrible story about her of all the worst things she's done. One, hoping that she'll get it, right? If she hears me say it enough, like, maybe it'll sink in. And then, just desperate for help from somebody. And like you said, it is such a hard situation and everybody just wants to be heard. It's really important to find a skilled therapist who can handle such a difficult dynamic like that. I think it takes a really high level of skill to be able to navigate for three, five, whatever family members, for everybody to feel heard. And it is going to take time to build that, kind of to get that rhythm together. And like you mentioned, substance use can be so polarizing, and it is important to get on the same page. even if they're, when I'm working with parents and if they're not on the same page, it's really about how can we find our common ground? Because there always is some form of common ground and start from there. Because it is the parent's responsibility to do that and not get kids caught in the middle. It's such a hard place to be.
Definitely. I think, like we had talked about earlier too, is like modeling that behavior. If parents can see you and your partner, I mean, if children can see their parents and their partner working together as a united front and come together with a solution, even if that solution doesn't work, but coming together united, I think it's what's really important. And then modeling that behavior. So whether, if you are going to couples counseling or if you are doing your own work or if you have your own support system, I think kids learn by watching their parents or they by watching the world around them. So I think that also gives them the space to say like, okay, it is okay to get help from other people, or it is okay to lean on my partner or somebody else for support. They might not have that direct thought, but I think showing them that behavior will help them, um, whether it's in their substance use or in their treatment, feel a little bit more at ease with, what they're expecting from their parents.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great points. So as we wrap up, I want to end on maybe, well, this has all been very positive, but thinking about any maybe positive experiences or lessons that you have taken away from your family's um, whole coming together over your brother's substance use.
Yeah. I think I've gotten to the point where I can accept where my brother is. I don't have to necessarily agree with it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to, take control of it, but I can accept it. And my brother just celebrated his 20th birthday last week. And I could have approached that a lot of different ways. I could have like shunned him. I could have, not acknowledged it. I could have just said happy birthday and called it a day. I actually decided to show up with my boyfriend and take him bowling and have dinner. And we had a great time. And so now the positive thing that I'm trying to work on is just rebuilding our trust and rebuilding our relationships as siblings outside of the context of me trying to be a parent. And while he is still struggling with his substance use, our relationship has gotten into a much better place. And maybe one day that can be more of an influence or an encouragement to help him on his recovery journey.
Yeah, I love that. And I saw a video on your Instagram of, I think you made him like a memory book or something for Christmas or something.
Yes, 2 holidays ago, he wasn't really around for the holidays because of his addiction was really I think, was really heightened. And I didn't really want to get him a monetary gift. I didn't want to buy an item. I don't know. It didn't sit well with me, but I still wanted to show him that, I love him and I support him and I'm acknowledging that he is deserving of happiness on holidays. So I decided to get most of my family to write a little post-it and what they love most about him or what they remember most about him and collected those notes and some images from our life and put them into a scrapbook. And it was something that was therapeutic for me. It was something that I really enjoyed doing. And my brother said it was like one of the best gifts he's ever gotten. Um, Kind of the catch 22. This is a pro, but it's also kind of like this weird, sad place that I was coming from. Is I didn't give it to him for Christmas. I waited till after because I was going to give it to him for his birthday. And in 2023, my brother overdosed the day before his 19th birthday. So I gave him the scrapbook for his birthday as an encouragement of him and his sobriety and, what the future can hold. And I think the weird way of it working out actually had more of an impact than if I would have just gave it to him for Christmas. And no one could have anticipated it happening that way.
Yeah.
I think that was just more of a coincidence. And I like to say a sign from the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really impactful. I love the positive tone. One, that you're asking everybody to share something good about him, right? So that gets them thinking more positive thoughts about him. And then just the time and effort you put into being creative, because sometimes we really do have to be creative in these relationships, thinking of how we can show the person we love that we really value them in a way that feels good to us.
Right.
So that was really touching. So
Yeah.
anybody up, I'm going to put your Instagram in the show notes, and a link to your podcast will be in the show notes as well. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to share before we wrap up?
Nothing major. I would just remind everyone there are lots of dark days when it comes to having a loved one struggling with substance use, but I think it's important to find those glimmers of hope and those positive days. And hopefully they outweigh the dark ones. And always like to say, like, wherever there's life, there's hope, and people change every day, whether or not we see it. And just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that is so true. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.